In my decade of making content, one of the movies I've continuously planned to talk about was the direct-to-video sequel to my favorite movie, Bambi. I've had the script for it this whole time, but could never get the video made and uploaded. I think I finished one version, but it probably got caught by YouTube's copyright system, and I either never uploaded it to Dailymotion, or I did, and they flagged it too. And looking at that script now, I can see just how bad of a nostalgia critic wannabe I was going for, so we're gonna put that script in the bin, and if people are interested in seeing how bad it would have been, I can dig it out and show everyone another time. So, why Bambi 2? I mean, I could go on and on about how much I love the original Bambi. I love the movie so much that I sought out the source material, Felix Salten's Bambi, A Life in the Forest, which then became my favorite book. When that book entered the public domain last year, I actually read it out on live stream for my first anniversary stream as a VTuber. Like with most Disney movies, the source material is much, much darker. I also have the out-of-print sequel book that Felix Salten wrote about Bambi's two kids. I watched my original copy of the 1989 VHS edition until the clamshell broke and the magnetic tape warped, after which I got the 1997 re-release, then the 2007 DVD release, then the 2011 Blu-ray DVD release, and then I also pre-ordered my original copy of Bambi 2 from FYE at my local mall, which should tell you how long ago that was. Bambi 2 is also just a fascinating thing to have come out. The movie holds the record for the most time between release dates for a movie and its sequel, with the original movie coming out in American theaters on August 21st, 1942, and the sequel coming out on video on February 7th, 2006, making a gap of 63 years, 5 months, and 17 days. The thing is, this goes for the international releases as well, since the first movie premiered in London on August 9th, 1942, and the sequel premiered in Argentina on January 26th, 2006, which is also 63 years, 5 months, and 17 days. Coincidence?
I think not!
It also ended up as the last commercial VHS release from Disney, ending 26 years of Disney VHS releases. Plus, I'm not sure how true this is for the other direct-to-video sequels, but Bambi 2 actually got several theatrical releases when it was first released, mostly in European territories, plus Turkey, Argentina, Chile, and Mexico. According to Box Office Mojo, it managed to pull in $34 million from theaters in 2006, which isn't half bad for a Disney direct-to-video sequel. Here's the thing. The direct-to-video Disney sequels are mostly crap. There are a few gems that hold up, like the third Aladdin movie, the second Lion King, the third Cinderella, but most of them are just not as good versions of the previous movie. The animation is done on a TV-grade budget, usually by the same studio that made Disney's animated TV shows at the time, and hell, some of the so-called sequels are just failed attempts at a TV show. And yet, more than likely because I love the original so much, I found that Bambi 2 is actually not that bad. Once again, not as good as the original, but something I actually kind of admire, and I want to dig into why that is.
Bambi and the Great Prince of the Forest.
Actually, I was a lot like you.
Premiering on Disney DVD, Spring 2006.
More than a lot of the other sequels, I feel like Bambi had a solid premise going in. They're covering a point in time between the...
Your mother can't be with you anymore.
And the...
Let's sing a gay little spring song.
Gay little spring song. Happy Pride Month, everybody. They're also looking specifically at the relationship between Bambi and his estranged father. The book kind of did something like that too. After Bambi's mother died, the narrative jumps forward a year, and the now adult Bambi begins to learn the ways of the wise old stag, who drops that he's his father after teaching Bambi that humans can be killed and aren't all-powerful godlike beings. Like I said, Disney source material is much, much darker. The main crux is that relationship between the now motherless Bambi and his father, who is reluctant to raise Bambi himself because traditionally stags aren't the ones who raise the fawns. But as he actually spends time with Bambi, he's much more willing to take up the parental role, seeing much of himself in Bambi and wanting to help Bambi grow. It also helps that the Great Prince is voiced by the always wonderful Sir Patrick Stewart. Stewart's voice is able to match the timbre of the original Great Prince, which was given in an uncredited performance by Fred Shields, who would go on to narrate segments for Saludos Amigos and the Three Caballeros, as well as multiple Goofy shorts. However, Stewart also brings a lot more emotion to his performance. In the original movie, Shields made the Great Prince a stoic, detached character for the few lines that he has, save for the bit at the end where he's telling Bambi to get up.
Get up! Get up!
Stuart starts with this more stoic voice, but as the prince softens to Bambi and takes more interest in parenting, you can hear Stuart's voice relax and become more natural. Of course, Stuart's performance is only half of the equation. Alexander Gould, the original voice of Nemo in Finding Nemo, plays Bambi well, sounding close to the original voice, though a bit higher in tone, I think.
Play is a healthy part of a young deer's development.
Winter sure is long, isn't it?
It's a minor difference, but what really counts is Gould's actual performance. Bambi in the original is played fairly straightforward, standard little kid stuff. Gould's delivery carries more weight to it, adding emotion to the lines rather than just delivering them. The actual arc of Bambi and his dad's relationship is handled pretty well, with the Great Prince initially being stern and direct, but as he begins to see Bambi as less of a burden that he's stuck with and more of a joy to have with him, he eventually starts acting like a father would with their child by loosening up and playing with Bambi through a montage, only for his initial plan to have another doe raise Bambi trigger the, admittedly tired, trope of the liar revealed to serve as conflict for the two in the climax. And while that plot point was one of the weaker spots, it's seeing the two bond that makes this movie worth it, culminating with the Great Prince finally opening up about Bambi's mom after not wanting to talk about her throughout the movie.
Beautiful, isn't it?
One of the best elements of the original Bambi, though, was the watercolor style utilized by Chinese artist Tyrus Wong, who sadly was poorly mistreated by Walt Disney in Walt's attempt to clamp down on his workers' rights. Like, Wong didn't even take part in the animation strike, but I'm guessing Disney didn't like this Chinese immigrant working for him and wanted good red-blooded American animators or some shit like that. Seriously, Walt was a piece of shit behind the scenes, the exact opposite of the Fred Rogers type wholesome image he cooked up for himself. But I digress. It was Wong's watercolors that really set Bambi apart from the rest of the Golden Era Disney movies. These backgrounds added a surreal look to the forest where Bambi lived, with less emphasis on detail. And for the sequel, the animators did make an attempt to continue that surreal watercolor-inspired style. Now, given the aforementioned 63-year gap between the two, animation technology progressed leaps and bounds, with even hand-drawn animation being done on computers by the 2000s. As such, we would lose that surreal watercolor aesthetic in the backgrounds, though the artists do their best to emulate it digitally, leading to a more detailed background than the first movie that also contains those surreal elements that were inherent in Wong's original style. However, it's the character animation in 2 that really shined. While the cell art of the original had a more distinct black outline on the characters, the outlines on the characters in 2 are kept hidden by keeping them the same color as what they're outlining. Not to mention that, especially compared to a lot of the other Disney direct-to-video output, the animation is much closer to feature film quality. The movements are much more fluid, not the stiffer style you see that's done to save on time. Another really subtle but noticeable bit that isn't seen in a lot of the direct-to-video sequels is the use of lighting. While not in every scene, a good amount of this movie features really great lighting, especially the scenes where Man and his dog show up. It's one of those touches that takes time to include and shows that the artists were putting in that effort and were given that amount of time to make it worth something.
A prince does not woo who.
Of course, like with so many of the Disney direct-to-video sequels, there's a bunch of issues with this movie that keep it from being as good as the original. For one thing, it can never fully leave that movie's shadow. Whole segments from Bambi 2 are just recreations of moments from Bambi, especially Bambi's fight with Rano and parts of the climax. I didn't hate the idea of making the nameless stag Bambi fights in the first movie into more of a character from his childhood, and in the production sketches, the animators for the original Bambi did refer to that stag as Rano, who was one of the other stags from the book. But I feel that the first fight worked because it was just treated as Bambi and a rival stag fighting for essentially an anthropomorphized version of deer mating season, where it's less about instinct and survival of the fittest and more about love and fighting for romance. In their attempt to make Rano a character, they do well in recreating this believable bully, namely that he's an overconfident twerp who acts tough to try and gain respect, but everybody can see right through him. However, by going so far as to basically copy the fight from the first movie, it ends up lessening the impact of their attempted rivalry, especially ending with the "we'll meet again" trope, so they can reference that first movie again. Even during the climax, it goes so far as to tease a death scene just so they can reference,
Get up, Bambi.
Bambi. Get up.
The groundhog predicting spring allows them to use Gay Little Spring Song. Gay Little Spring Song. Which then begs the question, why did the kids know what in the first movie was basically the songbird mating song? Isn't that like a bunch of kids singing I'll Make Love to You by Boys to Men?
I'll make love to you like you want me to.
The one callback that does work is Thumper being asked by his mom what his father told him, which was at least a recurring gag in the first movie, so bringing it back makes some sense. But between copying actual shots from the first movie to full-on line reads, this movie ends up leaning too much on the first movie. And that seems to be one of the biggest problems plaguing Hollywood filmmaking in when it comes to franchises. That these sequels and reboots constantly have to lean on that first movie as a crutch rather than just use it as a baseboard to jump off and do something new. At the same time, some of the newer elements aren't working much either. The aforementioned groundhog scene doesn't really work, except to get Bambi close enough to the meadow for, admittedly, a really good scary scene using a new element in man's arsenal, the deer call, which when used sounds like Bambi's mother.
Even when you can't see me, I'm here. I'm here. I'm here.
Hello? Mother?
Unfortunately, no sooner is that element introduced than it's used once and then never mentioned again. The porcupine as a character was better, but both him and the groundhog being played by the director made them feel more ancillary. Like, we don't know what to do with these two characters and we couldn't get any more actors in to fill the roles, but here they are anyway. Rano never fully works as an antagonist, ironically because they undercut how tough he actually is for humor. The adoptive mother Melina, though great casting with veteran voice actor Cree Summer, isn't in the movie long enough to be a worthwhile character. We also lost out on excellent music. I get Disney's not going to shell out for a full choir to direct a video sequel, but to go from that full chorus to just coffee house music is very underwhelming. It's not even to disparage the musicians in the sequel, as the songs here are pretty decent. I just think they could have still brought in an LA-based choral group for a few sessions and kept the soundtracks consistent. Speaking of soundtracks, the score is another place where they lean a bit too much on the original. The most memorable music reuses motifs from the first movie's score, and otherwise it barely even stands out, unlike how the first movie's score was really one of its big selling points. Thumper's whole theme of teaching Bambi to be brave is also kind of a weak point. What we get from Flower and Thumper is good overall, though Flower's skunk spray being treated as a fart joke is hit and miss. I guess the filmmakers wanted to mimic Thumper teaching Bambi how to do stuff in the first movies, but this whole endeavor never really works. Even by the end, when Bambi does get over his fear and become brave, it doesn't feel like a payoff from the bits with Thumper as much as it is Bambi trying to be more like his father. I'm not sure what else they could have done with Thumper and Flower in the movie, but the whole teaching bravery subplot just never really worked. There are a few improvements, though. I specifically liked that Feline feels like an actual character in the movie. In the original movie, Feline was relegated to being just the female love interest, having a little personality as a kid, but none once she grows up. Here, Feline is shown to be confident and caring, showing concern for Bambi at the loss of his mother, and when he gets hurt facing the porcupine, scoffing at Rano's attempts to sound tough and standing up to him during that copied shot from the first movie, and at the end, happy to see Bambi doing well, living with his dad. And honestly, that's not too far off from her characterization in the book. In the source material, Feline is kind of a smartass, cocky in the face of her weaker brother Gobo, and the more reserved and shy Bambi, which was then carried over into her adulthood until she and Bambi have to deal with their relationship strains as Bambi becomes more solitary like his father. So while book Feline has the most personality, at least Bambi too made an effort to give her one. Speaking of female characters with more prominence, Thumper's sisters have more screen time. The Disney Bunnies line of books wouldn't be launched until a year after this in 2007, but I wouldn't be surprised if while making this they wanted to set up a spin-off for Thumper's family. After all,
Merchandising, merchandising. where the real money from the movie is made.
They're still treated as a collective without any individual names, but they serve as a cute foil for Thumper. They earnestly want to spend time with him, but he feels embarrassed by them and keeps trying to avoid them for the most of the movie. It's a cute recurring gag. That pretty much covers Bambi 2. It's not a very dense film, but I guess if we had to get a follow-up to the original Bambi at all, we could have gotten far worse than this. Like Bambi, Thumper, and Flower singing bad country music, or George Carlin with nothing to do while telling the same story as the first movie's Act 1, or a really bad failed Bambi TV series. Which admittedly was something I did make up on my own around the time this movie came out, with episode plots and new characters and everything. I also concocted one for a Lady and the Tramp TV series set after the second movie. Be careful how much media you consume, kids, it fucks with your head. Now I get to look forward to the Disney Plus live-action remake of Bambi. Yippee.